The mating ceremony fell silent when the Alpha King arrived unannounced. Dozens of wolves stepped forward, but his gaze passed them all and stopped on the girl standing alone at the edge of the circle. The rain came down in sheets, turning the ceremonial grounds into a mirror of mud and shattered moonlight. Marin stood at the very edge of the gathering circle, her bare feet sinking into the cold earth, her thin ceremonial dress clinging to her skin like a second layer of shame. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. The invitation had been a formality, a cruel joke whispered through the pack bonds 3 nights ago. Show up, they said. Stand where you belong. At the back. In the shadows. Where no one has to look at you. Her wolf stirred beneath her ribs, restless and aching, but Marin pushed her down. She always did. Because her wolf wasn't like the others. She didn't shimmer silver or gold under the full moon. She didn't howl with the pack or respond to the alpha's call with eager submission. Her wolf was something else. Something wrong. Something that had gotten her mother exiled and her father killed, and Marin had spent 18 years trying to bury that truth so deep it would never claw its way back to the surface. The ceremony had been going on for hours. One by one, the unmated wolves had stepped forward, offering their scent to the gathered alphas and betas, hoping for a bond to ignite, a match to be made. Marin watched from her place in the shadows, her arms wrapped tight around herself, her breath misting in the cold night air. She watched Vivian, the beta's daughter, step into the circle with her head held high, her auburn hair cascading down her back like a river of fire. She watched Brielle, the healer's niece, offer her wrist to a visiting alpha from the northern packs, her smile soft and hopeful. She watched them all, and she felt nothing but the hollow ache of knowing she would never be chosen. Never be wanted. Never be enough. And then the air changed. It happened so fast that Marin didn't register it at first. A hush fell over the crowd, sudden and absolute, like someone had stolen the breath from every wolf present. The rain seemed to pause mid-fall. The wind died. Even the flames in the ceremonial torches flickered and bowed, as though the night itself was bending to something greater. Marin looked up. He stood at the entrance to the clearing, framed by ancient stone pillars wrapped in ivy and old magic. The Alpha King. She knew who he was before anyone whispered his name. Everyone did. Damien Corvin, ruler of the 5 territories. The wolf who united the packs after the Blood Wars. The one they said could kill with a glance and command loyalty with a breath. He was draped in midnight furs, his dark hair slicked back from a face carved from shadow and stone, his eyes gods, his eyes burning gold even from across the clearing. No one had expected him. The Alpha King didn't attend mating ceremonies. He was myth and legend and power wrapped in flesh, and he certainly didn't concern himself with border pack rituals in the rain-soaked woods. But there he was. Real. Present. And every wolf in that circle dropped to one knee. Marin didn't. Not because she was brave. Because she was frozen. Her body wouldn't move. Her wolf surged forward, sudden and violent, pressing against her skin like she wanted to tear free, and Marin gasped, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her chest. Pain lanced through her ribs, white-hot and electric, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. The world tilted. And when it righted itself, the Alpha King was staring directly at her. Not at Vivian with her perfect bloodline. Not at Brielle with her gentle hands and healing magic. Not at any of the wolves kneeling before him with their heads bowed in respect and their pulses fluttering with hope. At her. Marin's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The rain started again, harder now, drumming against her skull, soaking her hair, but she couldn't look away. His gaze was molten gold, burning through the space between them, and she felt it in her bones. In her blood. In the place where her wolf lived, hidden and restrained and screaming to be free. He took a step forward. The crowd parted without being asked. Another step. His boots hit the mud with a sound that echoed too loud, too final, like the closing of a door or the sealing of a fate. Marin wanted to run. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to disappear into the trees before he reached her, before whatever this was became real. But her feet stayed rooted. Her body betrayed her. And her wolf, gods, her wolf was singing. She had never heard her wolf sing before. Damien stopped 3 feet away from her. Up close, he was overwhelming. Taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. His scent hit her next, cedarwood and smoke and something ancient, something that tasted like power and blood and the kind of dominance that didn't need to be spoken. It wrapped around her throat like a collar. He studied her. Silent. Unreadable. His eyes traced the lines of her face, the angle of her jaw, the wild mess of her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. He looked at her like he was searching for something. Like he already knew what he'd find. And then he spoke, and his voice was low and rough, the kind of sound that vibrated in your chest and stayed there. "What's your name?" The question shattered the silence. Marin heard someone gasp behind her. Heard the rustle of shock rippling through the crowd. But she couldn't focus on them. All she could focus on was him. On the way he was looking at her. On the way her wolf was clawing at her insides, desperate and feral and awake in a way she'd never been before. "Marin," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "My name is Marin." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Satisfaction. Something darker. "Marin," he repeated, and the sound of her name in his mouth felt like a brand. Behind him, the pack beta stepped forward, his face pale, his hands raised in placation. "Your Majesty, forgive the confusion. This one, she's not part of the ceremony. She's unmarked. Unbonded. She shouldn't even be." Damien's head turned, just slightly, and the beta's words died in his throat. The Alpha King looked back at Marin, and this time, he smiled. It wasn't kind. It wasn't gentle. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found exactly what he'd been hunting. "She's the only one here," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "who matters." And Marin felt the ground fall out from beneath her. If you want to know what happens when the girl no one wanted becomes the one the Alpha King claims, hit that subscribe button for Shayla's Romance Library, because this story is just beginning. The Alpha King's words hung in the air like a blade suspended above the crowd. She's the only one here who matters. Marin couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The world had narrowed to the space between her and this man, this king, who was looking at her like she was the answer to a question no one else had thought to ask. Behind him, the assembled wolves stood frozen, their shock a living thing that pressed against her skin. She could feel their confusion, their disbelief, their anger. Vivian's face had gone white, her lips pressed into a thin line. The beta's daughter had spent weeks preparing for this ceremony, had commissioned a dress woven with silver thread, had practiced her submission stance until it was perfect. And now the Alpha King was standing in front of the packless girl with no lineage and no future, speaking words that made no sense. Marin's legs trembled. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the mud and let it swallow her whole. But Damien was still watching her, his golden eyes pinning her in place, and she couldn't move. Couldn't run. "Come with me," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. Not exactly. But there was no question in his voice either. Just certainty. Like he knew she would follow. Marin's voice broke. She shook her head, wet hair plastering to her cheeks. "I don't understand. You don't know me. You can't. I know enough." He took another step closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke. "And we need to leave. Now." That's when she felt it. A ripple of wrongness that slithered across her skin like oil. Her wolf snarled, sudden and vicious, and Marin's head snapped toward the tree line. The shadows there were too deep, too still. Something was watching them. Something that didn't belong. Damien's hand moved to the blade at his hip in one fluid motion. He didn't turn around, but his voice dropped lower, edged with warning. They found you faster than I expected. What? Marin's pulse spiked. What are you talking about? Who found me? The ones who've been hunting you your entire life. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than dominance in his expression. Something that might have been concern. Or guilt. The ones who killed your mother. The ones who will kill you too if we don't move. Right now. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mother. The woman who'd been exiled when Marin was barely old enough to remember her face. The woman who died alone in the western wilds, her throat torn out by what the pack claimed were rogues. But Marin had never believed that story. Had spent years wondering what really happened. Why her mother ran. What she'd been running from. And now this stranger, this king, was telling her he knew. You're lying, she whispered, but even as she said it, her wolf was screaming at her to listen. To trust him. To run. Damien's expression hardened. I wish I was. The shadows at the tree line moved. They didn't step into the clearing. They poured. Like smoke given form, like darkness that breathed and hunted and wanted. Marin saw eyes glinting red in the black mass, heard the sound of something wet and hungry dragging through the mud. The wolves behind her erupted into chaos, shouting, shifting, scrambling backward, but Damien didn't flinch. He moved in front of Marin so fast she didn't see it happen. One moment he was beside her. The next he was a wall of muscle and fury between her and whatever was coming. His hand shot out, grabbed her wrist, and the moment his skin touched hers, everything inside her ignited. Heat. Blinding and absolute. It tore through her veins like liquid fire, and Marin gasped, her knees buckling. She felt her wolf surge forward with a force that terrified her, felt something ancient and sleeping stir beneath her ribs, felt power she'd spent her whole life suppressing crack through the chains she'd built around it. Damien's grip tightened. Don't fight it, he said, his voice rough. Not yet. I've got you. And then he was pulling her, running, his hand locked around her wrist like an anchor. Marin's feet barely touched the ground. The world blurred around them, trees whipping past, rain stinging her face, the sounds of snarling and screaming fading behind them. She didn't know where they were going. Didn't know how he was moving so fast or why her body was keeping pace with his when she should have collapsed 3 steps in. All she knew was that her wolf was howling. Not in fear. In recognition. They ran until the sounds of the ceremony disappeared entirely, until the forest grew so thick the moonlight couldn't penetrate, until Marin's lungs burned and her legs gave out. Damien caught her before she hit the ground, his arm wrapping around her waist, steadying her. Easy, he murmured, and his voice had changed. Softer now. Almost gentle. You're safe. For now. Marin pulled away from him, stumbling backward until her spine hit a tree. Her chest heaved. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. Who are you? She demanded. Really? Not the king. Not the legend. Who are you and why do you know my name? Damien stood a few feet away, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes still burning gold in the darkness. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he said, I'm the one who's been watching you for 5 years. Making sure they didn't find you before you were ready. Making sure you survived long enough to become what you were always meant to be. Marin's blood turned to ice. What I was meant to be. What does that mean? He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, like he was approaching something wild. Something that might bolt. It means your mother didn't die because she was weak, Marin. She died because she refused to let them take you. Because she knew what you carried. What you are. Stop. Marin's voice cracked. Just stop. I'm nothing. I'm nobody. My wolf is broken. I don't have power. I don't have. You have everything. Damien's voice cut through her panic like a blade. You're just too afraid to look. He was close enough now that she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but wouldn't let himself. That bond you felt when I touched you. That fire in your veins? That's not me, Marin. That's you. Waking up. Finally. Tears burned behind her eyes. She shook her head, refusing to believe him. Refusing to let hope dig its claws into her chest. Why should I trust you? You're a stranger. You could be lying. You could be. I could be, he agreed quietly. But I'm not. And deep down, you know that. Your wolf knows it. He held her gaze, unflinching. I came to that ceremony for one reason. You. I've known where you were for years, Marin. I've been waiting. Watching. Keeping you alive from the shadows because if I claimed you too soon, before you were strong enough to survive what's coming, they would have torn you apart. Marin's breath hitched. What's coming? Damien's expression darkened. A war. One that started the night you were born. One that's been waiting for you to step into it. The rain poured harder. Somewhere in the distance, something howled low and wrong and filled with hunger. Damien's hand moved to the blade at his hip again. We need to keep moving. I have a place. Safe. Warded. But you need to decide right now, Marin. Come with me, or go back to that ceremony and hope they don't tear you apart for being chosen by a king when they think you're nothing. His eyes burned into hers. What's it going to be? Marin stared at him. At this stranger who knew her name. Who claimed he'd been watching her. Protecting her. Who looked at her like she mattered when no one else ever had. Her wolf pushed against her ribs, insistent. Desperate. Trust him. And God's help her, Marin did. I'll come, she whispered. Damien's expression softened, just for a heartbeat. Then he nodded, turned, and started walking deeper into the forest. Marin followed. And didn't look back. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. The forest grew denser with every step, the trees twisting overhead like skeletal fingers reaching for a sky they'd never touch. Marin's feet were numb. Her ceremonial dress clung to her body in tatters, the thin fabric doing nothing against the cold that had settled deep in her bones. But she didn't complain. Didn't ask where they were going or how much farther. She just followed the broad shape of Damien's back, watched the way he moved through the darkness like he owned it, and tried not to think about what she'd just done. She'd abandoned her pack. The only home she'd ever known, even if that home had never wanted her. Her wolf stirred restlessly, but for once she wasn't trying to break free. She was content. That scared Marin more than anything else. Her wolf had never been content. Not in 18 years of living at the edge of a pack that tolerated her existence, but never embraced it. Not through the years of sleeping in the Omega quarters, of eating last, of keeping her head down and her voice quiet and her power, whatever it was, locked so deep inside her that sometimes she forgot it was there at all. But now, walking behind this stranger who claimed to be her salvation, her wolf was almost calm. Like she recognized something in him. Like she'd been waiting for him. Marin hated it. Hated that her body responded to him without permission. Hated that when he touched her wrist, every cell in her body had screamed yes in a way that terrified her. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if he was telling the truth or if this was just another kind of trap. She'd been trapped before. The memory surfaced without warning, dragging her under like a riptide. She was 7 years old. Small for her age, with tangled dark hair and eyes too old for a child. The pack had gathered for the first shift ceremony, the night when young wolves were supposed to transform for the first time, to prove their place in the pack, to claim their birthright. Marin had stood in the center of the circle with 6 other children, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. The alpha, not Damien, but the old alpha, the one who'd ruled her birth pack with iron and tradition, had called the change. The other children had shifted beautifully. For rippling silver and gray and tawny gold, young wolves tumbling and playing, their parents watching with pride. Marin had felt the change coming. Felt her bones start to crack and reshape, felt fur prickling beneath her skin. But then something else had surged up from deeper inside her, something that burned, and when she'd opened her mouth to howl, silver flame had poured out instead. The flames hadn't hurt anyone. They'd simply existed for 3 heartbeats, beautiful and impossible and wrong, before Marin had collapsed, her shift incomplete, her wolf retreating in terror. She'd woken up in the healer's tent with her father sitting beside her, his face carved from grief, and she'd known immediately that everything had changed. They'd called her broken, cursed. The girl whose mother had mated with something that wasn't quite wolf, whose bloodline was tainted with magic that didn't belong. They'd whispered that her mother had lain with a fire elemental, or worse, that she'd made a bargain with the old gods before Marin was born. No one knew the truth. But everyone agreed that Marin was dangerous. Her father had tried to protect her, had pleaded with the Alpha to let her stay, to give her time, to see if her wolf would settle. And the Alpha had agreed. On one condition. Marin would never shift. Never try to call her wolf again. Never access whatever power had manifested that night. If she did, if even a spark of that silver flame appeared, she would be exiled. Or executed. Whichever was more convenient. She'd been 7 years old, and they'd made her swear an oath. Her father had died 3 years later. A hunting accident, they'd said. But Marin had been 10 years old and already learning that accidents weren't always accidents. That sometimes people who asked too many questions about bloodlines and old magic disappeared. That protection only lasted as long as you were quiet and small and forgettable. So she'd made herself forgettable. For 8 more years, she'd lived like a ghost in her own pack. She'd learned to walk the edges of rooms, to speak only when spoken to bury her wolf so deep that sometimes days would pass and she'd forget she even had one. The silver flame never came back. She'd made sure of it. Until tonight. Until Damien had touched her, and something inside her had cracked wide open. "You're thinking too loud," Damien said, his voice cutting through the silence. Marin jerked, pulled from the memory. He'd stopped walking and was looking at her over his shoulder, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "I'm not thinking anything," she lied. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're terrified. Your heart's been racing since we left the clearing. And you keep looking at me like you're trying to decide if I'm going to kill you." Marin's jaw tightened. "Are you?" No, the answer was immediate. Absolute. He turned to face her fully, and even in the shadows she could see the gold burning in his eyes. "I told you already. I've spent 5 years keeping you alive. Why would I kill you now?" "I don't know," she said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I don't know anything. You show up at a ceremony I wasn't even supposed to attend. You look at me like you know me. You tell me people are hunting me, and then you drag me into the forest and expect me to just trust you? I don't even know why you were watching me. What you want from me. What you think I am." Damien studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, dragging a hand through his wet hair. "You want the truth? That would be a good start." He looked away, his jaw working like he was deciding how much to tell her. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Rougher. "I knew your mother." Marin's breath caught. "What?" "Not well," he continued. "But I met her once. 15 years ago, when I was still trying to unite the packs after the Blood Wars. She came to me in secret. Told me she had a daughter. Told me that daughter carried something ancient in her blood. Something that the old families would kill for if they knew it existed." His eyes found hers again. "She asked me to watch over you. To make sure that when your power woke up, you'd survive it. She said you were the key to ending a cycle that had been repeating for 1,000 years. That you were born to break something that should have been broken a long time ago." Marin's hands trembled. "Break what?" A bond, Damien said quietly. Between the packs and something older. Something darker. Every alpha ceremony you've ever attended, every bond that's been forged between mates, it's all been built on a lie. A binding that was never meant to be permanent. Your mother knew that. She'd seen the truth. And it got her killed. He took a step closer. That fire you carry, Marin? That silver flame? It's not a curse. It's proof. Proof that you're descended from the first wolves. The ones who walked with the old gods before the binding happened. The ones who could choose their mates freely, without rituals or ceremonies or alpha commands. Marin shook her head, backing away. That's insane. Why do you think your bond never activated until tonight? Damien's voice was steady. Certain. Why do you think every alpha in that circle passed you over, year after year, even though you're young and healthy and should have been chosen a dozen times by now? He stepped closer again, closing the distance. Because your wolf only responds to a true mate, Marin. Not a chosen one. Not a political match. A real bond. One that can't be forced or faked or manipulated. And those bonds haven't existed for 1,000 years. His hand lifted, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. Until you. Marin's vision blurred with tears. You're wrong. I'm nobody. I'm broken. I don't have. You have everything, Damien said fiercely. And they know it. The old families. The council. The ones who benefit from the binding staying in place. They've been hunting your bloodline for generations, wiping out anyone who might threaten their power. Your mother was the last one. Until you. He finally touched her, just his fingertips against her cheek, gentle and devastatingly careful. I didn't come to that ceremony to find a mate, Marin. I came to find you. To make sure that when they finally located you, I'd be there first. To give you a chance your mother never had. A tear slipped down Marin's cheek. And what if I don't want this? What if I can't be what you think I am? Damien's expression softened. Then you don't have to be. But you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to decide for yourself instead of spending the rest of your life running from something you don't understand. His thumb brushed away her tear. You asked me why you should trust me. I can't give you a reason that'll make this easier. All I can tell you is that I see you, Marin. Not the broken girl they told you were. The real you. The one they've been terrified of your entire life. His voice dropped to a whisper. And she's magnificent. Marin's breath shuddered out of her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not pitied. Not tolerated. Seen. And it was the most terrifying, exhilarating thing she'd ever experienced. Come on, Damien said gently, dropping his hand. We're almost there. You can rest. And then we'll figure out what comes next. He turned and started walking again. This time, when Marin followed, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of something that felt dangerously close to hope. The safe house wasn't a house at all. It was a ruin. Ancient stone walls rose from the forest floor like broken teeth, half swallowed by moss and ivy and centuries of neglect. What must have once been a temple or shrine now stood open to the sky, its roof long since collapsed, leaving only pillars and archways that framed the moon like windows into another world. Symbols had been carved into every surface, spirals and crescents and shapes that hurt to look at too long, like they were moving when Marin wasn't watching directly. She stopped at the entrance, her bare feet inches from the threshold, and felt her wolf press against her ribs in warning. What is this place? Her voice was barely a whisper. Damien moved past her without hesitation, stepping over the threshold like he'd done it 1,000 times. The moment his boots touched the stone inside, the carvings flared with soft silver light, just for a heartbeat, before fading back to shadow. It's old, he said simply. Older than the packs. Older than the binding. This is one of the original shrines built by the first wolves. Before they forgot what they were. Marin stared at the symbols glowing faintly on the walls. And you just know where it is? How to find it? I've made it my business to know. Damien crouched near the center of the space, brushing away dead leaves to reveal more carvings in the stone floor. When you're trying to undo 1,000 years of lies, you learn to follow the breadcrumbs the liars tried to erase. He glanced up at her, still standing frozen at the threshold. It's safe. The wards here recognize bloodlines, not pack bonds. You can cross. Marin's wolf was still tense, but something else had joined the wariness. Curiosity. Recognition. Like her wolf had been in a place like this before, even though Marin knew she hadn't. She took a breath and stepped over the threshold. The world shifted. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't violent. But the moment her feet touched the ancient stone, something settled in Marin's chest, a rightness she'd never felt before. The constant anxiety that had lived in her bones for 18 years went quiet. Her wolf stopped fighting. And for the first time in her life, Marin felt like she could breathe. What? She looked around, confused. What is this? Why do I feel like you're home? Damien finished quietly. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Because you are. This place was built for wolves like you. Before the binding happened. Before they decided our mates had to be chosen for us, that our bonds had to serve political purposes instead of our souls. He stood, gesturing to the carvings around them. This is what they took from us. What they tried to erase. Free wolves. True bonds. Magic that belonged to us, not to whoever controlled the rituals. Marin moved deeper into the space, drawn by something she didn't understand. Her fingers traced one of the spirals carved into a pillar, and the moment she touched it, the stone warmed beneath her palm. Silver light bloomed from the carving, spreading like veins through the rock, illuminating symbols she couldn't read but somehow understood. Moon chosen. Firstborn. Flame carrier. She jerked her hand back, gasping. Damien was beside her in an instant. Easy. It's just responding to you. To what you are. What I am, Marin repeated, her voice shaking. You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean something. Like I'm supposed to just accept that I'm some kind of what? Chosen one? That's insane. That's not how the world works. It's exactly how the world works, Damien said. You've just been taught to ignore it. To bury it. To think that your wolf is broken, when really she's the only one in your pack who still remembers the truth. He moved to another pillar, touching a different symbol. This one flared gold instead of silver. Every pack ceremony you've ever attended, every binding ritual, every alpha choosing a Luna, it's all theater. Performance. A spell cast so long ago that everyone forgot it was a spell at all. He looked at her. Your bloodline is what breaks it. The old families have spent 1,000 years hunting down anyone with first wolf blood, because as long as you exist, the binding can be undone. As long as you exist, wolves can remember what it felt like to choose their own mates. To love freely instead of being locked into bonds that serve everyone except the ones in them. Marin's head was spinning. And my mother was killed because she tried to break it, Damien said quietly. She found this place. Found others like it. Started asking questions the old families didn't want answered. And when she realized what you were, what you carried, she knew they'd come for you too. His expression hardened. She died buying you time. Making sure you'd survive long enough to be strong enough to fight back. Marin's throat tightened. She'd spent so many years angry at her mother. Angry that she'd left. Angry that she'd been weak. Angry that Marin had been stuck living a half-life because of choices her mother made. But if Damien was telling the truth, if her mother had died protecting her. I don't know how to fight, Marin whispered. I don't know how to be what you think I am. I've spent my whole life trying not to be anything at all. I know. Damien's voice was gentle. But you don't have to figure it out alone. He gestured around the shrine. This place will help. The wards here will protect you while you learn to access your power. And I'll teach you what I know. What your mother would have taught you if she'd lived. Marin looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. The weight he carried. This wasn't just about her. This was something he'd been fighting for years. Why do you care? She asked. You're the Alpha King. You have everything. Power. Control. Why risk it all to break a system that benefits you more than anyone? Damien's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he moved to the center of the shrine, where the carvings in the floor formed a perfect circle. Because I had a sister, he said quietly. And when she was 16, the old families chose a mate for her. Told her it was her duty. Her destiny. That the bond would settle and she'd learn to love him. His hands clenched at his sides. She didn't. And when she tried to break the bond, when she tried to choose someone else, someone she actually loved, they executed her. Called her a traitor. Said she'd endangered the pack by refusing her chosen mate. He looked up at Marin, and his eyes were blazing. She was 16 years old. And they killed her for trying to choose her own life. Marin's heart cracked. Damien. I became Alpha King, so I'd have the power to change things, he continued. But the binding is woven into every pack. Every ritual. Every ceremony. I can't just command it away. It has to be broken at the source. And the only ones who can do that are the bloodlines that were there when it was created. He stepped toward her. Your bloodline, Marin. You're not just a girl with strange fire. You're a key. Maybe the last one. And if we don't break this, if we don't undo what was done 1,000 years ago, more wolves will die the way my sister did. Trapped in bonds they didn't choose. Punished for daring to want something real. Tears burned in Marin's eyes. She thought of Vivian, standing in that circle with her practiced submission. Thought of Brielle, offering her wrist to an alpha she'd just met. Thought of all the wolves who'd convinced themselves that the bonds they were given were the same as the ones they would have chosen. And she thought of herself. Of 18 years spent believing she was broken because she couldn't fit into a system that was never meant to fit her at all. What do I have to do? She asked. Damien's expression softened. First, you have to learn to control your power. To call your wolf without fear. To access the flame without it burning you alive. He held out his hand. And then we find the other shrines. Wake the old magic. Gather what's left of the first wolf bloodlines. And when we're strong enough, when you're strong enough, we shatter the binding once and for all. Marin looked at his outstretched hand. At this man who'd lost his sister. Who'd spent years planning a revolution he couldn't fight alone. Who'd looked at her in a crowd of beautiful, perfect wolves and seen the only one who mattered. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 hours ago. Small. Quiet. Convinced she deserved to be forgotten. And she thought about the girl she might become. The one her mother died protecting. The one whose wolf was finally waking up. She took his hand. The moment their palms touched, the shrine exploded with light. Silver and gold intertwining, spiraling up the pillars, racing across the walls, illuminating every carving until the entire space blazed like a star had fallen to earth. Marin gasped, but she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Because the light wasn't burning her. It was singing. And her wolf, gods, her wolf was singing back. Damien's grip tightened, his eyes wide. Marin. The light pulsed once, twice, and then words appeared in the air above them, written in flame that didn't burn. She who walks between worlds. She who carries the old fire. She who will break what should never have been bound. Then the light faded, leaving them standing in the darkness, hands still clasped, both of them breathing hard. What was that? Marin whispered. Damien looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, he smiled. Really smiled. That was the shrine recognizing you. Claiming you. Telling the old magic that you're here. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Welcome home, Marin. Now the real work begins. They spent 3 days in the shrine. 3 days of learning to breathe without choking on fear. 3 days of Damien teaching her to reach for her wolf instead of burying her. 3 days of the ancient stones humming with approval every time Marin managed to call even a flicker of silver flame without flinching. It wasn't easy. Nothing about it was easy. Every time Marin tried to shift, her body locked up with memories of that ceremony when she was 7. of the Alpha's voice telling her she was broken, of her father's grief-stricken face, of 18 years of whispers that had convinced her the fire inside her was a curse instead of a gift. Damien would sit across from her in the center of the shrine, his voice steady and patient, talking her through the panic until she could breathe again. "Your wolf isn't separate from you," he'd said on the second night, when Marin had collapsed in frustration after another failed attempt. "She's not something you control. She's you. The truest version of you. And she's been trapped for so long she doesn't know how to trust that it's safe to come out." Marin had looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough?" Damien had reached across the space between them and wiped her tears with his thumb. "You survived 18 years in a pack that wanted you invisible. You survived your mother's death and your father's loss and every single person telling you that you were wrong for existing. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." And something about those words had cracked something open inside her. On the third day, just before dawn, Marin finally shifted. It wasn't graceful. Wasn't the smooth transformation she'd seen other wolves perform 1,000 times. Her bones cracked and reshaped with sounds that echoed off the shrine walls. Her skin split and reformed, fur rippling across her body in waves of silver and black. And when she opened her eyes, her wolf's eyes, the world was sharper, brighter, more. Damien was standing a few feet away, and even in wolf form, Marin could see the pride in his expression. The relief. "There you are," he said softly. "Welcome back." Her wolf had taken one step forward, then another. And then she'd thrown back her head and howled a sound of pure, unfiltered joy that shook the pillars and sent birds scattering from the trees beyond the shrine. Damien had shifted too, his own transformation liquid and effortless, and suddenly he was standing before her as a massive black wolf with eyes that still burned gold. He'd approached slowly, carefully, letting her wolf decide if she wanted him close. She did. For the first time in her life, Marin's wolf wasn't alone. They'd run through the forest until the sun rose, until Marin's muscles burned and her lungs ached, and she felt more alive than she ever had in human form. And when they'd returned to the shrine and shifted back, Damien had pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being whole. That had been yesterday. And now everything was about to fall apart. Marin woke to the sound of snarling. Not the playful kind. The kind that meant blood. The kind that meant violence. She bolted upright from where she'd been sleeping against one of the shrine walls, her heart slamming against her ribs. Damien was already on his feet, his hand on the blade at his hip, his entire body coiled for attack. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and hard. "Don't leave the shrine. The wards will hold." "What's happening?" Marin scrambled to her feet, but Damien was already moving toward the entrance. "They found us." He looked back at her, and his expression was grim. "I knew they would eventually. I just hoped we'd have more time." Before Marin could respond, figures emerged from the tree line. Wolves. At least a dozen of them. But not rogues. Not hunters. These wolves moved with military precision, their formation tight and controlled, their eyes cold and calculating. And at the center of them, still in human form, stood a man Marin recognized. Elder Cardin, head of the old family's council. The wolf who presided over every major pack ceremony, who approved every alpha bond, who held more political power than most kings. He was ancient. Gray-haired and thin, his body bent with age, but his eyes were sharp and vicious. Marin had only seen him twice in her life, both times from a distance, but she'd felt the weight of his attention even then. Like he could see through skin and bone into the parts of you that you kept hidden. He looked at the shrine, at Damien standing in the entrance. And then his gaze slid past him to Marin, and his lips curled into something that might have been a smile if smiles could carry contempt. "So it's true," Cardin said, his voice papery and cold. The great Alpha King, hiding in ruins with a packless whelp. How disappointingly predictable. Damien's hand tightened on his blade. Leave, Carden. This isn't your territory. You have no authority here. Authority? Carden laughed, and the sound was like dead leaves scraping against stone. Boy, I had authority when your grandfather was still suckling at his mother's teat. I have presided over bonds for 60 years. I have maintained order when lesser wolves would have torn the packs apart. And you dare tell me I have no authority? He took a step closer, and the wolves around him moved with him, a coordinated threat. You've made a grave mistake, Damien. You were supposed to choose a proper mate at that ceremony. A Luna who would strengthen alliances. Instead, you've disgraced yourself by claiming this abomination. Marin flinched at the word, but Damien's voice was ice. Watch your mouth. Why? Carden's eyes glittered. She is an abomination. Her bloodline should have been purged generations ago. Her mother understood that. Understood that some things are too dangerous to be allowed to live. But she was weak. Sentimental. And it got her killed. Rage blazed through Marin so hot and sudden that silver sparks flickered at her fingertips. Damien must have sensed it because he spoke without turning around, his voice sharp with warning. Marin. Not yet. But Carden had seen the sparks. Had seen the fire trying to break free. And his expression shifted from contempt to something hungrier. Greedier. There it is, he breathed. The old fire. Gods, I'd almost forgotten what it looked like. He addressed the wolves around him. Do you see? This is why her bloodline is so dangerous. That flame doesn't belong in this world anymore. It's a relic. A threat. And if we allow it to exist, if we allow her to wake the old magic, everything we've built will crumble. One of the wolves, a massive gray male, spoke up, his voice rough. The binding keeps order. Keeps the packs from devolving into chaos. Without it, wolves will choose mates based on foolish emotions instead of strategic necessity. They'll weaken the bloodlines. They'll be free, Damien cut in, his voice ringing with fury. That's what terrifies you, isn't it? That wolves might actually choose their own mates. Build their own bonds. Live their own lives instead of serving your political games. Carden's expression hardened. Freedom is a luxury weak wolves invented to justify their failure to serve the greater good. The binding exists because true bonds are rare, boy. Most wolves would spend their entire lives searching for something that doesn't exist. The binding gives them purpose. Structure. A place in the world. It gives you control, Damien snarled. And you're terrified of losing it. Of course I am. Carden didn't even try to deny it. Because when wolves are left to their own devices, they destroy themselves. I have seen it. I have lived through the blood wars. I watched packs tear each other apart over mating disputes and broken bonds, and the chaos that comes from letting emotion rule over sense. He pointed at Marin. That girl represents everything that nearly destroyed us. And you think you're going to use her to break the only thing that's kept the pack stable for 1,000 years? You're not a revolutionary, Damien. You're a fool playing with fire. Marin's hands were shaking. Not with fear. With rage. With the need to prove him wrong. To show him that she wasn't just some relic to be destroyed. She took a step forward, but Damien's arm shot out, blocking her. Don't, he said quietly. That's what he wants. He wants you to lose control. To prove his point. Carden smiled, thin and cruel. The boy's right. Go ahead, little wolf. Show us what you are. Burn something. Hurt someone. Prove that you're exactly as dangerous as we've always said. Marin's wolf snarled inside her chest, desperate to be free. Desperate to fight. But Damien's words echoed in her mind. Your wolf isn't something you control. She's you. The truest version of you. And the truest version of Marin didn't want to prove Carden right. She took a breath, let the fire recede, lifted her chin, and met the elder's gaze without flinching. I'm not going to fight you, she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Not because I'm afraid, but because I don't need to prove anything to you. You've already decided what I am. And you're wrong. Carden's smile faded. But here's what I know, Marin continued, taking another step forward until she was standing beside Damien. You're terrified of me. Not because of what I might do, but because of what I represent. The idea that wolves don't need you. Don't need your ceremonies, or your binding, or your control. That they could be whole without you. Her eyes burned silver. And that terrifies you more than any fire I could summon. For a moment, the clearing was silent. Then Carden's expression twisted into something ugly. Take them. The wolves lunged. Damien shoved Marin backward into the shrine, his blade already singing through the air. Stay inside the wards, he roared, and then he was moving, a blur of lethal grace and controlled violence. Marin stumbled back, her heart racing, as the first wolf crashed against an invisible barrier at the shrine's threshold and went flying backward with a yelp. The wards. They were holding. But Damien was outside them. Fighting alone. She watched him cut through 3 wolves in as many breaths, watched him move like death itself, but there were too many. And Carden was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching with cold satisfaction. Marin's wolf howled inside her chest. He's going to die. He's going to die protecting you, and you're just going to stand here. No. She wasn't that girl anymore. Wasn't the one who hid. Who stayed small. Who let other people fight her battles. Her mother had died for her. Damien's sister had died for trying to be free. Marin wasn't going to let anyone else die because she was too afraid to be what she was. She closed her eyes, reached for the fire that lived in her bones. And for the first time in her life, she didn't try to control it. She let it free. Silver flames erupted from her body, not wild or destructive, but focused and bright and impossibly beautiful. The shrine blazed with light. The wards pulsed and expanded, pushing outward in a wave that sent half the attacking wolves flying. Damien spun around, his eyes wide, and Marin met his gaze. I told you, she said, and her voice echoed with power that didn't sound entirely human. I'm not hiding anymore. She stepped through the wards, and they didn't stop her. Didn't burn her. They recognized her. Obeyed her. Because this was her magic. Her birthright. And she was done pretending it didn't exist. Carden's face went white. Impossible. She shouldn't be able to. Marin raised her hand, and silver fire danced across her palm. You wanted to see what I am? Here I am. The remaining wolves backed away, their eyes wide with fear. And for the first time in her life, Marin stood her ground. The wolves retreated. Not because Carden called them back. Because they were terrified. Marin stood at the edge of the shrine with silver flames still flickering across her skin, and she watched them disappear into the forest like shadows fleeing the dawn. Even Carden had gone pale, his papery skin stretched tight over his skull, his cold eyes filled with something she'd never seen directed at her before. Fear. He'd backed away slowly, his gaze never leaving her, and then he'd spoken in a voice that cracked like old ice. This isn't over, girl. You've just signed your death warrant. Then he'd turned and fled with the others. The moment they were gone, Marin's legs gave out. Damien caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her waist, taking her weight. The silver flames flickered and died, leaving her gasping and shaking, her body feeling like it had been wrung out and left to dry. I've got you, Damien murmured, his voice rough. I've got you. You're okay. But Marin didn't feel okay. She felt raw, exposed, like she'd peeled back her own skin and shown the world everything she'd spent 18 years hiding. And now there was no taking it back. No pretending. Carden had seen. His wolves had seen. And word would spread. They're going to come back, she whispered against Damien's chest. They're going to bring more wolves. More weapons. They're going to. Let them. Damien's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair. Let them come. You just proved that you're stronger than they thought. Stronger than even I realized. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes fierce. You held the wards. Extended them. That takes power most wolves don't have. And you did it without training. Without preparation. Do you understand what that means? Marin shook her head weakly. She didn't understand any of this. Didn't understand how she'd done what she'd done, or why her body felt like it was vibrating with leftover energy, or why Damien was looking at her like she'd just performed a miracle instead of nearly gotten them both killed. It means you're exactly what your mother thought you were, Damien said quietly. And it means we have a chance. A real chance. He helped her back into the shrine, settling her against one of the pillars. The ancient stones were warm beneath her, humming softly like they were pleased. Like they recognized what she'd done. Damien crouched in front of her, his hands resting on her knees, his expression serious. We can't stay here much longer, he said. Cardin will return with reinforcements. Probably within a day or two. We need to move. Find the next shrine. Start gathering allies. Marin's head was spinning. Allies? Who would ally with us? With me? Damien, I attacked Council Wolves. The old families are going to declare me an enemy of every pack. No one's going to risk helping us. Some will. Damien's voice was certain. There are wolves who've been waiting for someone like you. Who've been questioning the binding for years, but had no way to fight it. Your mother wasn't the only one who knew the truth, Marin. She was just the only one brave enough to act on it. He squeezed her knees gently. And now you're too. Marin looked at him, at this man who'd upended her entire world in 3 days. Who'd looked at her in a crowd and seen something no one else had. Who'd fought for her. Protected her. Believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Why are you doing this? She asked, and her voice cracked. Really? You said it was because of your sister, but you're the Alpha King. You could have found another way. A safer way. Why risk everything for a girl you barely know? Damien was quiet for a long moment. His hands slipped from her knees, and he sat back on his heels, his gaze dropping to the stone floor between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. Because when I met your mother 15 years ago, she told me something I've never forgotten. He looked up at her. She said that every wolf deserves to know what it feels like to be chosen. Not assigned. Not obligated. Chosen. And she asked me if I'd ever felt that. If I'd ever looked at someone and known, not because a ceremony told me, not because it was politically advantageous, but because my soul recognized theirs. His jaw tightened. I told her no. And she looked at me with so much sadness and said, then you're as trapped as the rest of us. Just in a different cage. Marin's breath caught. I've spent 15 years trying to prove her wrong, Damien continued. Trying to convince myself that I didn't need that. That power and duty and responsibility were enough. That I could change the world without ever letting anyone close enough to matter. He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. And then I saw you standing in that clearing, and everything she said made sense. Because I looked at you and I knew. Not because of some ceremony or prophecy or magical destiny. Because my wolf recognized yours. Because when I touched you, something in me that had been sleeping for 30 years woke up. His voice dropped to a whisper. So yes, I'm doing this because of my sister. Because she deserved better. But I'm also doing it because of you. Because you deserve to know what it feels like to be chosen by someone who sees you. All of you. And wants you anyway. Marin's eyes burned with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Like she was precious. Like she mattered beyond what she could do or what power she carried. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared, Damien. Of what I am. Of what they'll do to me. Of what happens if I fail. I know. His hand finally made contact, his palm cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. But you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, we face it together. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. I told you before. I see you, Marin. And I'm not going anywhere. Something broke open in Marin's chest. Something that had been locked and guarded and convinced it would never be safe to want. She lifted her hand, her fingers trembling, and placed it over his where it rested against her cheek. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "How to trust someone. How to let someone in. I've spent so long keeping everyone at a distance." "Then don't trust me yet." Damien's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Just don't push me away. Give me time to prove that I'm not going anywhere. That I meant what I said." Marin searched his eyes, those impossible golden eyes that had looked at her across a crowded ceremony and changed everything. And she saw no deception. No hidden agenda. Just raw honesty and a vulnerability that matched her own. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay." They stayed like that for a moment, foreheads nearly touching, breathing the same air, the space between them charged with something electric and terrifying and real. Then Damien pulled back slightly, his hand sliding from her cheek. "We should rest. Eat. You burned through a lot of energy and you need to recover before we move." He stood, offering her his hand. Marin took it, letting him pull her to her feet. But she didn't let go right away. Couldn't quite bring herself to break the contact. "Damien, yeah, thank you." Her voice was soft. "For seeing me. For not running when you realized what I was." His expression softened. "Marin, I've been waiting my whole life to find you. Why would I run now?" He squeezed her hand once, then released it and moved toward the supplies he'd stashed in one corner of the shrine. Marin watched him go, something warm and fragile blooming in her chest. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying, beautiful hope. The sun had set by the time they'd eaten, and Damien built a small fire in the center of the shrine. Not for warmth, the ancient stones held heat like living things, but for light. For comfort. They sat across from each other, the flames dancing between them, and for the first time since they'd met, the silence wasn't filled with urgency or fear. It was just quiet. "Tell me about your sister," Marin said eventually. Damien looked up from the fire, surprise flickering across his face. Then his expression softened into something sad and distant. "Her name was Lyra," he said quietly. "She was 4 years younger than me. Wildest wolf I've ever known. She used to shift and run through the royal gardens at midnight, howling at the moon until the guards would chase her. My father hated it. Said she was undisciplined. Unfit for her station." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But she was just alive. More than anyone I've ever met. She felt everything so deeply. Loved so fiercely. And when they told her she had to mate with some beta's son to secure an alliance, it killed something in her." His hands clenched. "She tried. For 6 months, she tried to make the bond work. Tried to love him. But there was nothing there. And when she finally admitted she'd fallen for someone else, a wolf from a lower pack, someone with no political value, they called her a traitor. Said she'd endangered everything." Marin's heart ached. What happened to him? The one she loved? "They exiled him," Damien said flatly. "Sent him to the wastelands with nothing. Lyra tried to go after him, tried to leave with him, but my father stopped her. Locked her in the royal quarters. Told her she'd learn her place." His voice went cold. "She hung herself 3 days later." Marin's hand flew to her mouth, a sound of grief escaping before she could stop it. "I found her," Damien continued, his eyes distant. "I was the one who cut her down. And I made a vow standing in that room with her body in my arms, that I would burn the entire system to the ground if it meant no other wolf would die the way she did." He looked at Marin, and his eyes were blazing with unshed tears and barely contained rage. "So when your mother came to me and told me about you, about what you could do, I knew. This was it. This was how I'd keep my promise to Lyra. By making sure wolves could choose. Could love. Could be free." Marin stood and moved around the fire before she could think better of it. She dropped to her knees in front of Damien and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. He stiffened for half a heartbeat, and then his arms came around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I'm sorry, she whispered against his shoulder. I'm so sorry you lost her. I'm sorry you lost your mother, he whispered back. They held each other in the firelight, two broken wolves clinging to the only person who understood, and for the first time since this began, Maren didn't feel alone. When they finally pulled apart, Damien's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her temple, his gaze dropping to her lips. Maren, he said quietly, if I kiss you right now, it won't be because of prophecy. Or destiny. Or because you're the key to breaking the binding. His thumb traced along her jaw. It'll be because I want to. Because I've wanted to since the moment you looked at me in that clearing and didn't bow. Maren's breath caught. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might shatter. Then kiss me. So he did. Damien's lips met hers with a gentleness that stole her breath. Not demanding. Not possessive. Just reverent. Like he was tasting something sacred. Maren's eyes fluttered closed, her hands coming up to fist in his shirt, and she kissed him back with everything she had. Every ounce of fear and hope and desperate, fragile trust. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. We're going to survive this, he murmured. All of it. I promise. Maren nodded, not trusting her voice. And for the first time in her life, she let herself believe him. They left the shrine at dawn. Damien moved with military precision, erasing their tracks, covering their scent with herbs he'd gathered from the forest floor. Maren followed in silence, her body still humming with leftover energy from the night before. Not just from the fire she'd unleashed. From the kiss. From the way Damien had held her afterward, like she was something worth protecting instead of something to be feared. But the warmth faded as they traveled deeper into unfamiliar territory. The next shrine was 3 days north, Damien had explained. Hidden in the mountains where the old packs used to gather before the binding. Before the council decided that wolves needed to be controlled instead of trusted. They'd have to cross through neutral territory, land claimed by no pack, but traveled by many. Dangerous, but faster than going around. They walked for hours without speaking, both of them listening for signs of pursuit. The forest was too quiet. No birds. No small animals rustling through the undergrowth. Just the sound of their footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch beneath their boots. Maren's wolf was restless, pacing beneath her skin like she could sense something wrong. Something coming. Damien, Maren said quietly. Do you feel that? He nodded, his hand already moving to his blade. We're being watched. Have been for the last mile. Cardin's wolves. I don't know. His jaw tightened. But we need to. A howl cut through the silence. Close. Too close. Then another. And another. Surrounding them. Damien grabbed Maren's hand and pulled her against a massive oak tree, putting his back to the trunk so he could see in all directions. When I tell you to run, he said quietly, you run. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just get to the mountains. Find the shrine. I'm not leaving you. Maren. His voice was steel. If they take you, everything we're trying to do dies. You're more important than I am. So if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me. Before Maren could respond, wolves emerged from the trees. But these weren't Cardin soldiers. They were younger. Wilder. Their eyes glinted with something that looked like desperation mixed with greed. Rogues, Maren realized with a sinking heart. Wolves who'd been exiled from their packs and now survived by taking what they could from whoever was weak enough to be prey. The largest one, a scarred brown wolf with one torn ear, shifted into human form. He was bare-chested, covered in dirt and old wounds, his smile showing too many teeth. Well, he drawled. The Alpha King himself. All alone in the woods with a pretty little thing. What's the matter, Your Majesty? Council finally get tired of your revolutionary ideas. Damien's expression didn't change. Leave now and you get to walk away. The rogue laughed. See, that's cute. Real cute. But here's the thing, we heard some interesting rumors. Heard there's a bounty on a girl. Dark hair. Silver flame. Ring any bells? Marin's blood turned to ice. Cardin's offering a fortune to anyone who brings her in alive, the rogue continued, his eyes sliding to Marin. And you just happen to be traveling with a girl who matches the description. That's either a real fun coincidence, or we just hit the jackpot. 6 more wolves stepped out of the trees, forming a loose circle. All of them watching Marin with hungry eyes. She's not going anywhere with you, Damien said, his voice deadly quiet. Yeah, the rogue tilted his head. And who's gonna stop us? You? You might be a king, brother, but you're just one wolf. We're 7. Even you can't fight those odds. Damien's hand tightened on his blade. Try me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then everything exploded into violence. The rogues lunged as one, and Damien met them with brutal efficiency. His blade sang through the air, finding throats and arteries with surgical precision. 2 rogues went down in the first 3 seconds. But there were too many, and they were fast, and Damien was trying to keep himself between them and Marin, which meant he couldn't fully defend himself. Marin watched a clawed hand rake across his shoulder, watched blood bloom across his shirt, and something inside her snapped. Silver fire erupted from her palms before she could think about it. She threw it at the nearest rogue, and he went flying backward with a scream, his fur singed, his eyes wide with terror. Another rogue turned to face her, and Marin raised her hand again, her wolf snarling. And then someone grabbed her from behind. An arm wrapped around her throat, cutting off her air. Another hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled, tried to summon more fire, but whoever held her knew what they were doing. They were pressing on pressure points, making her body go weak, making the fire flicker and die. Got her, a voice shouted. Damien's head whipped around, his eyes going wide with panic. Marin. A wolf slammed into him from the side, driving him to the ground. Then another. They piled on top of him, too many to fight off, and Marin watched in horror as they forced him down, as blood spread across the forest floor. Damien. She tried to scream his name, but the hand over her mouth muffled it. Tried to reach for her fire, but her body wouldn't respond. Everything was going dark at the edges, her vision tunneling. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was Damien's golden eyes, blazing with fury and fear, locked on hers. Then nothing. Marin woke to the sound of voices. Her head was pounding. Her mouth tasted like blood. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her back with silver-threaded rope that burned against her skin. Silver. The one metal that weakened wolves. That kept them from shifting, from accessing their power. She was sitting on cold stone, her back against something rough. A cave wall, she realized as her vision cleared. She was in a cave. And she wasn't alone. Don't understand why we can't just kill her and take the bounty anyway, someone was saying. One of the rogues. Dead or alive, Cardin's paying. Because alive is worth more, you idiot. That was the scarred leader. And because I want to know what makes her so special. Girl can throw fire. That's not normal wolf magic. That's something else. Marin kept her eyes mostly closed, watching through her lashes. There were 4 rogues in the cave with her. The other 3 must have stayed behind to deal with Damien. Or his body. No, she couldn't think like that. Damien was alive. He had to be alive. What about the king? Another rogue asked. Think he's dead? Probably. And if he's not stupid enough to come after us alone. The leader crouched in front of Marin, and she felt his eyes on her face. But just in case, we move at nightfall. Get her to Cardin before the king can mount a rescue. He reached out, grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her head up. Marin's eyes snapped open, meeting his gaze with as much defiance as she could muster. The rogue smiled. There she is. Welcome back, little flame. How's it feel to be worth more than gold? Go to hell, Marin rasped. He laughed. Oh, she's got spirit. Carden's gonna love breaking that out of you. He stood, releasing her chin. Keep watch. And if she tries anything at all, knock her out. I don't care if Carden wants her conscious. Unconscious is still alive. The rogues nodded, and the leader walked to the mouth of the cave, staring out at the forest beyond. Marin's mind was racing. She had to get out of here. Had to find Damien. Had to. A sound. Soft and distant, but unmistakable. A howl. Not just any howl. Damien's howl. She'd know it anywhere after running with him in wolf form. Deep and commanding and filled with rage. He was alive. And he was coming. The rogues heard it too. They exchanged nervous glances. That's impossible, one of them muttered. We left him bleeding out. There's no way. Another howl. Closer this time. The leader's expression hardened. Get ready. If the king wants to die for this girl, we'll accommodate him. But something in his voice had changed. He was scared. They should be, Marin thought viciously. Because Damien hadn't come alone. The first wolf that burst into the cave wasn't Damien. It was massive and silver, with scars crisscrossing its muzzle. It tore into the nearest rogue before anyone could react, its jaws closing around the wolf's throat with lethal precision. Then another wolf appeared. And another. 5 in total, all of them moving with coordinated violence that spoke of training. Of loyalty. And then Damien was there. He'd shifted back to human form, blood still staining his torn shirt, his eyes blazing gold and murderous. He moved through the cave like death itself, his blade finding targets with brutal efficiency. The scarred leader tried to run, tried to shift, but Damien was faster. He slammed the rogue against the cave wall, his blade at the wolf's throat. Where is she? Damien's voice was barely human. There, the rogue gasped, pointing at Marin with a shaking hand. She's there. Unharmed. I swear. We didn't. Damien didn't wait for him to finish. He slit the rogue's throat with one clean motion and let the body drop. Then he was across the cave, kneeling in front of Marin, his hands shaking as he reached for the silver ropes binding her wrists. I'm here. I've got you. You're safe. The moment the ropes fell away, Marin threw her arms around him, burying her face in his neck. He smelled like blood and smoke and fury, but he was alive. He was here. I thought they killed you, she choked out. They tried. His arms wrapped around her, holding her so tightly it hurt. But I had help. Marin pulled back enough to see the other wolves. They'd shifted back to human form now, 3 men and 2 women, all of them looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to awe. Who are they? She whispered. Damien's jaw tightened. Allies. Wolves who've been waiting for someone like you. Who want the binding broken as much as we do. One of the women stepped forward. She was tall and lean with auburn hair and sharp green eyes. My name is Kira, she said quietly. And we've been looking for you for a very long time. Marin stared at her. At all of them. Why? Because we're like you, Kira said simply. Not fire carriers. But first wolf descendants. Our bloodlines have been hunted for generations. We've been in hiding, waiting for someone strong enough to lead us. To unite us. She looked at Damien, then back at Marin. And then the Alpha King sent word 3 days ago. Said he'd found you. Said you were ready. That it was time to fight back. Marin looked at Damien, betrayal lancing through her chest. You sent word? When? We've been together every moment since. Before the ceremony, Damien said quietly. I sent messages to my contacts the day before I came for you. Told them to be ready. To gather allies. I knew the moment I claimed you publicly, we'd have a target on our backs. I wasn't going to face that alone. Marin pulled out of his arms, her chest heaving. So you planned this. All of it. You knew what would happen. You knew Carden would come. You knew. I knew we'd need help, Damien cut in. And I was right. If these wolves hadn't been tracking us, hadn't been close enough to reach me after the rogues attacked, you'd be on your way to Carden right now. You'd be dead. Or maybe none of this would have happened if you'd been honest with me. Marin's voice cracked. If you'd told me you'd already set things in motion. If you'd asked me if I wanted to be the center of your revolution instead of just deciding for me. Damien's expression hardened. Would you have come with me if I'd told you? If I'd said, come with me, let me claim you publicly, and then let's start a war that will get us both killed? Would you have agreed to that? Marin opened her mouth. Closed it. Because he was right. She wouldn't have. She would have run. You didn't give me a choice, she whispered. You just decided. Like everyone else in my life has always decided. What I should be. What I should do. You're no different than the pack that rejected me or Carden wanting to kill me. You all just want to use me for something. Damien flinched like she'd struck him. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tears burned in Marin's eyes. You said you saw me. That you chose me. But you chose what I could do for you. What I represented. Not me. That's not true. Then why didn't you tell me? Her voice broke. Why keep it secret? Why make me think we were alone in this when you'd already built an army? Damien's hands clenched at his sides. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Just looked at her with an expression that might have been guilt or anger or grief. Then he said quietly, because I was afraid you'd leave. And I couldn't lose you before I'd even really found you. The words hung in the air between them. Marin stared at him, at this king who'd upended her world and made her believe she mattered, and then revealed he'd been moving pieces on a board she hadn't even known existed. I need time, she whispered. I need to think. She turned away from him, from all of them, and walked to the mouth of the cave. Stared out at the forest where everything had fallen apart. Behind her, she heard Kira speak quietly. Give her space. She's been through enough. And Damien, his voice hoarse with something that sounded like heartbreak, I know. Marin wrapped her arms around herself and tried not to feel like everything she'd started to believe in had just crumbled to dust. Marin didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of the cave, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Behind her, she could hear the quiet murmur of voices, Damien and his allies discussing strategy, making plans, deciding the next move in a war Marin hadn't asked to be part of. Except that wasn't entirely true, was it? She had asked. The moment she'd taken Damien's hand in that shrine. The moment she'd kissed him back. The moment she'd unleashed her fire and stood her ground against Carden's wolves. She'd made choices. Even if those choices had been made with incomplete information. Her wolf stirred restlessly, unhappy with the distance between her and Damien. Unhappy with the way Marin's heart ached every time she thought about the look on his face when she'd walked away. But Marin pushed the feeling down. She needed clarity. Needed to figure out what she actually wanted instead of just reacting to what everyone else expected from her. You're angry. Marin didn't turn around. Kira settled beside her, close enough to be companionable, but far enough to not be intrusive. The woman moved with the grace of someone who'd spent years learning to be invisible, learning to survive. I'm tired, Marin said quietly. Of being surprised. Of finding out that nothing is what I thought it was. He should have told you, Kira agreed. About the messages. About us. But he was terrified. I've known Damien for 5 years, and I've never seen him scared of anything. Until you. Marin finally looked at her. Why would he be scared of me? Kira smiled, sad and knowing. Because you're the first thing he's wanted for himself instead of for his cause. And that makes you dangerous. To him. To everything he's built. She pulled her knees up to her chest, her green eyes reflecting starlight. Damien spent 15 years constructing a revolution. Every move calculated. Every alliance strategic. Every risk measured. And then you showed up, and suddenly nothing was calculated anymore. He wanted you. Not what you could do. Not what you represented. You. Marin's throat tightened. He said. I know what he said. I was there. Kira's voice was gentle. And he meant it. But he's also spent half his life learning not to need anyone. Learning to put the cause above everything else. So when he realized he needed you, really needed you, not just as a weapon, but as a person, it terrified him. And he did what scared people do. He tried to control the situation. Tried to make sure nothing could go wrong. She looked at Marin. He was wrong to keep it secret. But he wasn't wrong about needing help. Or about you being in danger. Cardin won't stop. The old families won't stop. And we can't fight them alone. Marin stared out at the forest. I don't know how to be what everyone needs me to be. Then don't be. Kira's voice was firm. Be what you need to be. The rest of us will follow. Before Marin could respond, a sound cut through the night. Distant but unmistakable. Howls. Dozens of them, rising in unison like a chorus of death. Kira was on her feet in an instant, her body tense. That's not rogues. Damien appeared at the mouth of the cave, his face grim. It's the council. Cardin brought his entire force. One of the other wolves, a broad-shouldered man named Stellan, shifted his weight uneasily. How many? Too many. Damien's jaw tightened. At least 40 wolves. Maybe more. They're surrounding us. We have maybe 10 minutes before they close the trap. Marin stood, her heart pounding. Can we run? Not fast enough. Not all of us. Damien looked at his small group of allies, 6 wolves against an army. His eyes found Marin's. But you can. If you shift now, if you run. No, the word came out sharp and absolute. I'm not running anymore. Marin. I said no. She walked toward him, her spine straight, her chin lifted. You brought me into this. You told me I was the key to breaking the binding. That I was important. That I mattered. So either you meant that or you didn't. But I'm done being told to run and hide while other people fight my battles. Damien stared at her, something raw and desperate in his eyes. If you stay, you could die. If I run, I definitely will. Eventually. Marin stopped in front of him. Cardin won't stop hunting me. The old families won't stop. So either I fight now or I spend the rest of my life running until they finally catch me. Those are my choices. And I choose to fight. Behind her, Kira spoke quietly. She's right. We all knew this was coming. Might as well make our stand here. The other wolves murmured agreement, and Marin saw something shift in Damien's expression. Pride. Fear. Resignation. Then we fight, he said quietly. He looked at his allies. But we fight smart. Marin, how much fire can you summon? Marin thought about the shrine. About the silver flames that had erupted from her without conscious thought. About the wards she'd extended. I don't know. More than before. But I can't control it. Not really. It just happens. Then make it happen on purpose. Damien's voice was intense. When they come, when Cardin's wolves close in, I need you to do what you did at the shrine. Push them back. Give us room to fight. And if I can't? You will. His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Because you're stronger than anyone has ever given you credit for. Including yourself. The howls came again. Closer now. Damien's hand dropped. Positions. Everyone shift. And Marin, he looked at her one last time. Don't hold back. Whatever you're afraid of unleashing, unleash it. Because if we're going to die tonight, we're taking as many of them with us as we can. Marin nodded, her mouth dry. The others shifted, their transformations smooth and practiced. Wolves of silver and gray and tawny gold, all of them smaller than Damien, but no less fierce. They fanned out around the cave entrance, creating a defensive line. Damien shifted last, his massive black wolf form radiating power and controlled violence. He positioned himself directly in front of Marin, a living shield between her and what was coming. And then the council's wolves appeared. They didn't charge. Didn't rush in like mindless beasts. They moved with precision, forming a perfect circle around the cave, cutting off every escape route. 40 wolves at least. Maybe 50. All of them massive. All of them trained. All of them staring at Marin with cold, calculating eyes. And at the center of them, still in human form, stood Carden. "This is your last chance," the elder called out, his papery voice carrying across the distance. "Surrender the girl. Walk away. I'll even grant the rest of you clemency. But the abomination comes with me." Damien's wolf snarled, a sound that made the ground vibrate. Carden sighed. "So be it. Take them. Kill the others. Bring me the girl alive." The wolves lunged. Marin closed her eyes and reached for the fire. It didn't come gently. Didn't rise like a tide or flicker like a candle. It exploded from her core with a force that drove her to her knees, silver flames erupting in a circle around her, expanding outward in a wave of heat and light and ancient power. The council wolves yelped and scattered, backing away from the fire, their eyes wide with terror. But Carden was shouting, commanding them forward, and 3 of the braver ones tried to push through the flames. Marin's eyes snapped open, and they were burning silver. She lifted her hand, and the fire obeyed. It coiled around the attacking wolves like living rope, lifting them off the ground, holding them suspended in the air. They struggled and whined, but the flames didn't burn them, didn't hurt them. They just held them, controlled them, claimed them. "She's not strong enough to hold them all," Carden shouted. "Press forward. Break through." More wolves charged, and Marin's fire expanded, creating a barrier between her allies and the attackers. Damien and the others used the opening, tearing into the council wolves with brutal efficiency. Blood sprayed across stone and earth. Bodies fell. But there were too many. For every wolf they took down, 2 more took its place. They were being overwhelmed. Slowly, steadily. Marin felt her power starting to waver. Felt exhaustion creeping in at the edges. She couldn't hold this much fire. Couldn't maintain the barrier and control the wolves she'd captured, and a flash of movement. One of the council wolves broke through the flames, lunging directly at Marin. She threw up her hand instinctively, and silver fire poured from her palm, catching the wolf mid-leap. This time, the flames burned. The wolf's scream was cut short as it turned to ash, disintegrating before it hit the ground. The entire battlefield went silent. Marin stared at her hand, horror and power warring inside her. She'd killed. Hadn't meant to. Hadn't wanted to. But she'd done it. And it had been easy. There, Carden's voice rang out, triumphant and vicious. "You see? She's a murderer. A killer. Everything I said she was. She doesn't deserve mercy. She deserves enough." The word came from Marin's throat, but it didn't sound like her voice. It was layered, resonant, old. She stood, and the silver flames around her blazed brighter, coalescing into a shape behind her, something massive and lupin and made entirely of fire. A wolf. Not her wolf. Something ancient. Something that had been sleeping in her blood for generations. The first wolf. The original. The one from whom all shifter magic had descended. Carden's face went white. Marin took a step forward, and the firewolf moved with her, its eyes burning like stars. "You've hunted my bloodline for 1,000 years, she said, and her voice echoed with the weight of centuries. "Killed my ancestors. Bound the packs to your will. Convinced them they needed you. That they were too weak to choose their own paths." She took another step. The council wolves backed away, their ears flat, their tails tucked. "But I am not weak. I am not broken. And I am done being afraid of what I am." She raised both hands, and silver fire poured from her like a flood. Not to harm, not to kill, but to illuminate. Every wolf in that clearing was suddenly bathed in silver light, and Marin felt the binding, the ancient spell woven into every pack bond, like a web of golden thread connecting them all to Carden, to the old families, to a system that had convinced them they needed to be controlled. And she saw how to break it. "This ends now," Marin said. She pulled. The golden thread snapped. Every wolf in that clearing stumbled, gasping as something fundamental shifted inside them. The binding, the ancient magic that had dictated their bonds for 1,000 years, shattered like glass. And for the first time in their lives, they were free. Carden felt his knees, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. No, no, you can't, this isn't. It's over, Damien said quietly. He'd shifted back to human form and now stood beside Marin, blood-stained and fierce. The binding is broken. Your power is gone. And if you ever come near her again, if you ever threaten her or anyone else who refuses to be controlled, I will end you myself. He looked at the council wolves. Go home. Tell the old families what happened here. Tell them the age of forced bonds is over. And if they try to rebuild what Marin just destroyed, we will destroy them. The wolves hesitated. Then, one by one, they turned and disappeared into the forest. Carden remained on his knees, staring at Marin with something that looked like hatred mixed with fear. You've doomed us all, he whispered. Without the binding, the packs will fall into chaos. They'll destroy each other. Everything we built. Everything you built was a cage, Marin said quietly. And cages deserve to be broken. She turned away from him, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The silver fire faded. The first wolf dissolved back into her skin. And Marin collapsed. Damien caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her into his arms. I've got you, he murmured. You did it. It's over. You're safe. Marin looked up at him through blurry eyes. Did I just change everything? He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him. Yes, you did. Good, she whispered. And then darkness took her, gentle and complete. Marin woke to sunlight and silence. Not the oppressive silence of fear or danger. The peaceful kind. The kind that came after a storm had passed and left the world washed clean. She was lying on soft grass, a cloak draped over her like a blanket. When she opened her eyes, she saw trees overhead, ancient and gnarled, their branches reaching toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. And sitting beside her, his back against a tree trunk, was Damien. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and dried blood still streaked his arms and chest. But he was watching her with an expression so tender it made her throat tighten. How long? Her voice came out rough. 2 days. He shifted closer, his hand reaching out to brush hair from her face. You broke 1,000-year-old spell, Marin. That kind of magic takes a toll. She tried to sit up, and he was there immediately, supporting her, his arm around her shoulders. The world spun for a moment, then steadied. Did it work? She asked. The binding, is it really gone? It's gone. Damien's voice was filled with something that sounded like wonder. Every pack bond that was forced, every connection that was manufactured, they're all broken. Wolves across the territories woke up yesterday feeling like they could breathe for the first time. Some of the bonds held because they were real. Because those wolves actually chose each other beneath the spell. But the false ones, they shattered. He looked at her. You freed them, Marin. All of them. Tears burned behind her eyes. And Carden fled. The old families are in chaos. Most of their power came from controlling the bonds, from deciding who mated with whom. Without that, Damien's expression hardened slightly. They're still dangerous. Still influential. But they're not untouchable anymore. And word is spreading about what you did. About what you are. Marin's stomach nodded. So now everyone knows. Yes. He squeezed her shoulder gently. And some of them are going to be angry. Some will see you as a threat. But Marin, his voice dropped, intense and certain. So many more are going to see you as hope. As proof that they don't have to accept the lives they were given. That they can choose something different. She looked down at her hands. They looked normal now. No silver fire. No ancient magic. Just skin and bone and the faint trembling of exhaustion. I don't feel like hope. I feel like I just broke the world. You broke a system, Damien corrected. One that needed to be broken. And yes, things are going to be messy for a while. Chaotic. But chaos is better than captivity. Freedom is worth the uncertainty. He moved to kneel in front of her, taking both her hands in his. And you're not alone in this. Kira and the others, they're already spreading word. Gathering more first wolf descendants. Building something new. Something better. A network of wolves who want to choose their own paths instead of having them dictated by ceremony and politics. Marin met his eyes. And you? What do you want? Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want to keep the promise I made to my sister. I want to make sure no wolf ever dies the way she did. That no one is forced into a bond they don't choose. That love, real love, is possible without needing permission from people who think they know better. He lifted her hands, pressing them to his chest, over his heart. And I want you. Not because of what you can do or what you represent. But because when I look at you, I see home. I see the person my soul has been searching for. And if you'll have me, if you can forgive me for keeping secrets and trying to control something I should have trusted you with, I want to spend whatever time we have left proving that I choose you. Every day. Without magic or ceremony or fate forcing my hand. His voice dropped to a whisper. I choose you, Marin. Do you choose me? Marin stared at him, at this king who'd upended her life and believed in her when no one else did and made her brave enough to become who she was always meant to be. And she thought about the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago. Small and scared and convinced she deserved to be invisible. That girl was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who'd looked at an army and refused to run. Someone who'd shattered a 1,000-year-old binding because it was wrong. Someone who'd chosen to be brave even when everything inside her screamed to hide. Someone who could choose love instead of accepting what she was given. I choose you, she said, and her voice was steady. Strong. Not because you're a king or because you saved me, but because you see me. The real me. The broken pieces and the fire and everything in between. And you didn't run. She squeezed his hands. So yes. I choose you. Every messy, complicated, terrifying part of this. Damien's eyes blazed with emotion, and then he was pulling her forward, his lips crashing into hers with a desperation that stole her breath. This kiss was different from the first one. Not gentle or tentative. It was claim and promise and relief all tangled together, and Marin kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien pressed his forehead to hers. We're going to rebuild, he murmured. Create something new. Something better. And it's going to be hard. There will be wolves who fight us. Who want the old ways back. But we'll face them together. Marin nodded. Together. Behind them, she heard footsteps. Kira appeared through the trees, followed by Stellan and the others. They looked worn but hopeful, and when Kira saw Marin awake, she smiled. Welcome back, Kira said. We've been waiting for you. Marin stood, Damien's arm steadying her, and looked at the small group of wolves who'd risked everything to fight beside her. What happens now? Now, Kira's smile widened. Now we show the world what freedom looks like. One choice at a time. 3 months later, Marin stood in a clearing that had once been used for mandatory mating ceremonies. But tonight, it looked different. No rigid circles. No designated positions based on rank. Just wolves gathered freely, talking and laughing and choosing for themselves who they wanted to stand beside. Some had brought their chosen mates, bonds that had held true even after the binding broke. Others came alone, reveling in the freedom to wait. To search. To decide. And at the center of it all was a new shrine. Not ancient stone covered in moss, but fresh-cut wood carved with symbols that wolves from across the territories had contributed. Spirals and crescents and shapes that represented choice and freedom and the future they were building together. Damien stood beside Marin, his hand warm in hers, and looked out at the gathered wolves. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. 3 months ago, we broke something that should have been broken a long time ago. And I know it hasn't been easy. I know there are still packs that resent the change. Still wolves who wish for the old certainties. He squeezed Marin's hand. But I also know that for the first time in 1,000 years, every wolf here gets to choose. Gets to love freely. Gets to build bonds based on connection instead of obligation. And that's worth fighting for. Worth protecting. Worth building into something that lasts. He looked at Marin. This is your moment. Your words. I'm just here to stand beside you. Marin's heart was pounding, but when she looked out at the faces watching her, some familiar, many not, she didn't feel the old fear. Didn't feel small or broken or wrong. She felt powerful. Purposeful. Free. I used to think I was broken, she said quietly. That there was something wrong with me because I didn't fit into the world as it was. Because my wolf didn't respond to commands. Because my fire scared people. She lifted her chin. But I wasn't broken. The world was. And it took me 18 years to understand that sometimes, the things that make us different, the things that make us dangerous to systems built on control, those are the things that make us powerful. Silver flames flickered to life in her palm, gentle and controlled. This is who I am. Fire carrier. First wolf. Free. And if you're here tonight, it's because you want to be free too. Because you're tired of being told who to love. Who to bond with. Who to be. She closed her hand, and the fire disappeared. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to create new rules to replace the old ones. I'm just going to say this, you get to choose. Every day. Every bond. Every path. It's yours. And no one, not the old families, not the council, not even me, gets to take that away from you again. The clearing erupted in howls. Approval. Joy. Freedom given voice. Marin looked at Damien, and he was smiling at her with so much pride and love that it made her chest ache. Not bad for a girl who used to hide at the edge of circles, he murmured. Not bad for a king who decided revolution was more important than safety, she shot back. He laughed, and the sound was light and free and real. And Marin realized that this moment, this life, this choice, was exactly what she'd been meant to find. Not because of destiny or prophecy or ancient bloodlines, but because she'd been brave enough to reach for it. The story doesn't end here. Because Marin's journey from the girl no one noticed to the wolf who shattered an empire isn't just her story. It's the story of everyone who's ever been told they're too much or not enough. Everyone who's been made to feel broken for not fitting into systems that were never designed for them. Everyone who's had to choose between being true to themselves and being safe. And it's the story of what happens when you choose yourself anyway. When you choose to burn bright instead of staying small. When you choose freedom over certainty. When you choose love real, messy, complicated love over the safe, sanitized version someone else decided you should have. So I'll leave you with this question. Would you have chosen her side? When she stood in that clearing with silver fire dancing on her palms and the weight of 1,000 years on her shoulders, when the world told her she was dangerous and she decided to be dangerous anyway, would you have stood with her? Or would you have been one of the wolves who backed away? Who chose safety over freedom because freedom is terrifying and uncertain and demands that you trust yourself more than you trust the systems that have always told you who to be? The answer matters. Because Marin's story is still being written. In every wolf who chooses their own mate instead of accepting the one chosen for them. In every bond built on truth instead of obligation. In every act of courage that says, I deserve to decide my own life. And maybe, just maybe, it's being written in you too. So if this story lit something inside you, if it made you feel seen or brave or ready to choose yourself, then come back. Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we don't tell stories about perfect heroes or easy choices. We tell stories about wolves who burn bright in the darkness. About love that demands you be free. About the beautiful, terrifying power of choosing yourself even when the world wants you small. This is just the beginning. And every choice matters. Will you choose to see what comes next? The answer is yours.